We need a certain kind of person here, Mr. George, not a certain kind of two people. I mean, what do you think this is, a carpet factory? What?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Season 2, Episode 2 of Severance. Before we get into what happened this week on the show, we have to talk about some follow-ups that people sent in on YouTube comments, as well as commenting at decodingtv.com to discuss what happened on last week's episode of Severance. Gotta say, really appreciated all the comments saying how wrong Patrick was about Heli R being an innie in the severed floor.
That's something to dunk on. Like it was like, you know.
I kid, Patrick. I kid
Mhm.
because I'm rarely right about things. You know.
Okay, I see.
I mean, here's the question, Patrick. Do you feel like this week? I feel like the events of this week definitively show that it is Helena that is inside the severed floor.
I this one I would be surprised if it wasn't. Like it would be a swerve in a different direction.
Yeah.
I mean, at the point where she's studying camera footage, that seems to suggest that. Again, it's not the show's not saying it, but like it certainly seems to be laying out. I think is possible, like is the show gesturing
Right.
at that, and then it goes in a different.
Is there another
direction?
head fake? Is there another head
Right.
fake that we don't know about? That's possible.
Based on the evidence, if you were saying like what is the most plausible theory based on the available information, yes, it does seem like the swap occurred.
People pointed out some of the signs from last week, like that I did not point out. Like she
had trouble with the computer.
She had trouble
right?
with the
finding
computer.
power
Like everyone
button.
else knew how to use the computer. She had trouble with the computer. And there was also a scene where she was kind of disgusted at the idea that like innies and outies are like equal to each other. I think that was a thing that happened. Also people pointed out that hey, if she had 5 months, wouldn't she have thought of a better story than what she gave to the people in the break room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a few signs that I didn't point out of like that it's likely Helena, the outie, that's infiltrating the severed floor. Also, the fact that they got rid of all cameras, and it's like they don't need cameras anymore because Helena is there. She's there doing the stuff. So, there was a video published at Vanity Fair. Moving on to a different topic. About the opening shot of last week's episode, right? Incredible shot of them, of Adam Scott like running through the hallways of Lumen. He's trying to find Miss Casey in the wellness center and just see what's up. Like tell her what the situation is, and he's unable to find her. Vanity Fair did a great piece. Adam Lance Garcia always does a great job with these videos. He directed this one, and there are some interesting facts that I had said on last week's podcast that it was it felt like a motion control camera that was doing a lot of these movements. That was confirmed. It took 5 months to film the opening scene, which I thought was really interesting. They grabbed shots whenever they had time, and essentially, like what it sounds like is the set is not always configured in the correct way, like in the way that it had to be for that scene. So they shot like moments of that sequence part by part and then digitally stitch them together to make them seem like one long continuous shot. A lot of times when you see the background, the walls of Lumen, they are CGI walls because that's where all the camera equipment's going. And so a lot of CG, a lot of visual effects used, and they filmed it over the course of 5 months whenever they had like extra time and the hallway was configured correctly for them to do so. So anyway, I thought that was fascinating.
Other small thing. So the stunt that the cast did, the publicity stunt was a Grand Central Station in New York, where they set up like the cubicles and the cast actually came out and were interacting with one another. You couldn't hear what they were saying. The series creator was asked like, whose idea was that? Like, what were they talking about? And he's like, well, originally it was just going to be like random actors dressed up to kind of like look like severed people, and then eventually like Ben Stiller and Adam Scott like were so enamored with the idea of doing it, like, well, at least I'm going to do it, and then that spread to the entire cast wanting to do it. And not only that, they consider that like a quote episode of the show. They talked about what they're going to talk about, like conversations occur in there. He said it's not impactful to like it's not like,
but it's like canonical. It's like in canon.
Like, this is a show that in theory like has many days that we don't see that are inconsequential and like normal and boring. And they talked about like what could be some of the tensions and discussions that would occur on a day on a severed floor with them, and he's like, I don't even really know. I don't have a recording of like what they said, but he's like we talked about what would be things for them to do in there, and he's like, in our headcanon, we consider it like a canonical day in Severance. But I thought it's just that's just really fun. Like, it's inconsequential, but also
right,
like really delightful.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agreed. Okay, a few other follow-ups from last week. Mark Sands at Decoding TV commented the following. He had a few points he wanted to bring up. At the beginning of episode 1, when Mark ran into what used to be the wellness room, who was the mysterious man watching from the hallway around the corner? It definitely wasn't Milchick, because that person was wearing a white undershirt and Milchick's was blue. End quote. Let's stop here for a second. So what Mark is referring to is when Mark in the show goes to the wellness center, in the background, you see a character that's out of focus, right? He's like really far away. He's out of focus. Now, I, David Chen, originally thought that was Milchick, because moments later he meets Milchick.
Mm-hmm.
But Mark points out that Milchick is wearing a blue undershirt, and this guy is clearly wearing a white undershirt. When watching the Vanity Fair video about the opening sequence, Ben Stiller kind of draws a circle around this guy. He's like, hey, you see this guy in the background, and he kind of looks like Adam Scott's character, and kind of leaves it at that. And that's it. And it's like, well, we've spoken about how Cold Harbor might be cloning. Like, maybe that's Adam Scott in the background. Who knows? Anyway, just putting that out there. But otherwise, we have no idea who that is.
Interesting.
But it felt like it could be. Maybe it's Adam Scott in the background. Who knows? I'm just gonna put this out there because we have no better theories. It's Adam Scott in the background. And then
it's like if you take this nugget, this idea, this broad theory, and extend it out, it's very reasonable to start thinking most of this show has been deeply misleading on what we're watching. Like,
perhaps
that we could end up distrusting. Like, we feel like we've been watching the same character have an arc, but like, have we? Or have we just been watching clones experience, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that like could seep back in and reshape how we even think about what occurred before. We don't know how quickly they can create the clones, what the actual time, like, we're told 5 months, like, we have no way of actually judging like any passage of time within all of this. And so I don't know if that's where it ends up, but it's like, wouldn't be shocked if we found out like, oh, actually, like, the mark we've been following is like mark number 4 and 17 and 25. You know what I mean? Like, that would not be out of the realm of possibility, where it's like, we experience an arc with a series of clones that like Lumen has been experimenting on to try and arrive at a place or something of like that.
Mark continues writing at decodingtv.com. The newspaper about the innies blowing the whistle on Lumen used the group photo of the team from season 1, which makes this an obviously fabricated story, further cementing distrust of Milchick. Also means we don't have answers on the timeline of events so far, but I suspect that will unfold sooner rather than later. Boy, were you right, Mark. Also, Mark asks, where is Grainer's security key that Dylan used? Was no one confused how he got into the security room? Did Dylan's Audi find it in his pocket and turn it into the front desk when he left? I hope they don't leave this detail untouched, end quote. I think that it was probably dealt with when Milchick tackled Dylan at the end of season 1 of Severance. Like, he probably figured out, hey, you've got the security key on you. We're going to take it away. That's I don't think that's that interesting of an answer. I don't think we're going to come back to that topic, is my guess. But anyway, some interesting points brought up by Mark Sands, and thanks for his support at decodingtv.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, you can support the show, help to keep it going by becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com. Patrick Klepek, let's talk about season 2, episode 2 of Severance. Overall, what'd you think?
I loved this episode. I enjoyed the first episode. I posited at the end, like, is it just good to be back here? Like, where's the season going? And what I really like about the second episode is that it broadens a lot of the emotional stakes, does some really interesting world building. And what I was worried about was, are we just going to be trapped within the walls of this severed floor? And is this whole season just going to be, can we go find a mysterious door? And it's like, oh, like, that gives me bad vibes. Like that just, like, it seems like that's like, I don't want that to be the carrot for this season. And episode 2, like I said, broadens out these emotional stakes to be like, what's happening to these Audis? Like, what is the state of Severed? How it's perceived by the broad, like lots of things we've had no exposure to. And I did not miss being on like the floor with the group at all. Like it's a huge testament to like, essentially like it's the same actors, but I'm caring about two different, like there's just a lot of great stuff. It makes me very excited for the rest of the season because it is asking the kinds of questions that I wanted the show to ask and not getting singularly obsessed with lore stuff on the severed floor that I'm also interested in. But like, it remains a very human show, I guess is the shortest possible answer.
Yeah.
I think episode 2 continues that, grounds it in a way that I found incredibly compelling.
I love this episode. This is the episode that I was hoping that would have aired last week. But also, I now understand why they did it this way, right? Because you can't put this episode first and then have last week's episode have the same impact, right?
They feel paired. Like there's a reason a lot of like shows will premiere 2 episodes like at a time because they almost feel like they have to cut it up. So
that would have been great. I would have loved if they put them together, but
because it really feels like they are.
Yes.
What is the introduction to season 2?
Yeah,
it's these 2 episodes, and by the end of here, I feel like you have a sense of the arc and stakes for everybody involved that we're aware of so far.
Agreed. So yeah, this is what I had hoped they wanted, but with doing episode 1 the way they did it, now you get the rug pull feeling from people who didn't necessarily realize that Milchick was lying. Now, I had acknowledged that anything that Milchick says, I need to say this again, I guess, anything that Milchick says, we cannot take at face value. So like, I believe that is true, and so I always assume that they could be lying at any time because we've seen them lie a bunch of times in season 1. So
there's actually no, even though there are multiple times in this episode and in the series where you get the sense you're in a room with people who could just be talking openly to one another. I don't, absent like Helly talking to her father, there's like very rarely times where it feels like we have characters who are being completely honest and open about like how they feel, how they've observed or responded to a situation, which makes for like, it's really fun because like the show is always implanting a character into a scene where it's like, well, this character has all the answers, but there's a character here that they can't speak that way too. So thus we are continue to be gatekept from like true honesty in the show.
It's interesting. I think like Mark and his sister are the only 2 quote unquote normal characters in the show. Like when they interact, that's like you'd expect to see that interaction in any other show. Whereas every other character is in some way kind of, or every other interaction, there's like a character who's compromised in some way.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about what actually happened in episode 2. We pick up where I hope we would have picked up last episode, moments after the end of season 1. And then one by one, we watch everyone on the severed floor in Mark's crew get confronted and sometimes fired from their jobs. So let's start by talking about what happened. Let's go character by character. Helena. If you recall, at the end of Severance season 1, Helena's innie had gotten up on stage and said, they torture us down there. I'm Helena's innie. They torture us down there. It's terrible. At a party that was supposed to explain why Severance is good. Hugely embarrassing for the company. Helena's father walks in on her and calls her a fetid moppet, which I thought was pretty rough. We get the sense that Helena needs to clean up this mess. And it made me realize like there's this new emotion, Patrick Klepek, of can you imagine if your innie did something bad and then your loved ones were disappointed in you? Like there's no word in English language to describe that, because it's like embarrassed, but it's like you didn't even do it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it'd be like if your twin brother did something wrong. And like, or somebody with if you have the same name.
There's
somebody
when
if your name was Ted Bundy or something, like
or if you get blackout drunk, right? Like in which essentially there is a disassociation that happens. It's you,
right? Yeah,
you did things you may have done, likely done things that you regret. Poor decisions were made, but you weren't sitting there going like, well, putting all my brain together to figure out what to do next. Like there's a version of that where it's like you are responsible for the actions because you decided to be severed in the same way that you decided to have enough to drink that your brain literally said, I'm done. Like I'm out. Like see you tomorrow. So I think there's a aligning up there. And I think it's like some of the reactions we see in this episode, like line up to the similar sort of way that people would express disappointment. It was like, yeah, I understand you were blackout drunk, but like that was still you, your actions, like your decision making that led you to this point. No one made
Right.
you get severed. No one made you do those shots.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think Helena, my guess is right. She's like, hey, I will use myself as a example of how Severance can be good, and is really pissed that her innie is not being cooperative, right? Like, is really not happy with that. And anyway, so Helena needs to clean up this mess. She starts by meeting with Miss Cobell. She thanks her for helping her to stop the situation, but Miss Cobell demands an apology, which Helena then provides. But she will not return Miss Cobell to the severed floor. Instead, she offers her a role in the new and not at all completely made up Severance Advisory Council. Kind of just a way to control Miss Cobell, but they can't return her to the severed floor because she is super creepy, and Mark probably doesn't want to work for her anymore. So Helena then films an apology video. So much of how we experience Helena in this show is through video screens. You know, in season 1, we saw her like filming messages to her innie and stuff like that, and they're always really well done. They're always really chilling. And I thought the apology video was very, very well done as a, like, I don't know if it would have worked in real life, but she says, you know, I made the decision to consume alcohol while taking a non-Lumen medication for an arm rash, end quote, which I thought was just that you're absolving not only yourself of responsibility, but also Lumen of responsibility in that. And I thought that was a very like well put together, like very carefully put together PR statement where she essentially says, I got drunk and I pretended to be an innie and it was bad. It wasn't actually my innie. It was just me being drunk.
They're having a great time. They love it, actually. It felt like very much, you know, it was like the equivalent of the iPhone Note apology in video form. Like we've all seen
Right.
versions of this where like it feels very cold and calculated and obviously BS, but nonetheless, it becomes the canonized apology for someone to try and move past a crisis event. And I thought she sold it pretty well, honestly.
Yeah. And then we see scenes of Helena watching tapes of her innie, you know, presumably studying tapes of her innie to understand what exactly was going on down there, so that she could get ready to impersonate that character. Again, must have been a weird thing to watch like a version of you fall in love and flirt with another, you know, kiss someone. You know, it's just like, huh. That's what's great about Severance. It puts you in these situations where you're like, I wonder how I would feel if I was watching myself on tape and I didn't know what I was doing. You know,
I mean, we'll get into this when we talk about Mark, but there's one of the things that I'm really excited about is like, it seems like this season, the show is going to explore who would you, like, who are you, but also who would you be if at, you know, you and I are like, you know, not entirely far off from like the ages of the characters in the show. They're probably a little bit older than us, but like we're both old enough to have experienced a lot of like happiness and sadness and trauma and lost people. Like, and in many ways that defines you. But if you could strip away those parts and especially all the sad stuff, like who are you? Like what kind of person would you be if you could set all that to the side? And in many ways, I feel like it's the show, like, working through like your issues like is what has to be done in order to like find some semblance of self and happiness. And I think it's interesting where it's like you see versions of these characters which are like almost like baby versions of themselves, like ooh, like your wife didn't die and like you could just like figure yourself out again, and like ooh, you're not like the daughter of like a cold and creepy corporation that wants to control and exploit people. Like who would you be? And those are all really, I think those are questions we all ask ourselves. Like, what would you do if you could start over? Like, what could you do if this one event didn't feel like it defined your life? And I think those are all really fascinating questions for the show to unpack through a high concept sci-fi pitch, which is like the best of sci-fi, is like using high concepts to let us explore the world that we live in.
A couple of other thoughts on what you just said, Patrick. Number one, in the Ben Stiller and Adam Scott Vanity Fair interview, they were talking about how when Adam Scott makes the transition from outie to innie going down the elevator, he changes his posture. Because if you think about it, the Mark that's in the severed floor is only like a few months old, or a couple. I don't remember exactly, but it's like you can measure it in months, essentially,
Sure.
like how old he is, and he's unencumbered by the past. He's like, hey, like I'm looking forward to life, like this is life, and it's not bad, like.
Mhm.
And whereas the Mark from the outside is like has the weight of the world on his shoulders, and so when he would go from outie to innie, he would kind of straighten up his posture and like, and then, hey, I'm new to this world. I don't know what's going on. So anyway, I thought that was like fascinating
Yeah.
performance decision, and it kind of it lines up with what you're saying there. Also, I'm just gonna say this is a personal thing. I would be really weirded out watching my innie like swap bodily fluids with anyone. They'll just be like, it's just like weird. Like I'm just like, oh, like.
But maybe it's happened before. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Again, like, depending on if we're
right.
we're taking in our like, is this maybe the reason she has no emotional response is because, well, I've seen Helly do this before. She just falls in love with the first guy that she finds on the severed floor. I don't know. I'm with you.
That wasn't my sense necessarily. I think I just got the sense of like she's just kind of like studying this person that's her, but not.
It's
really
not her. She does not view that like. And
right.
I mean, big question.
She looks down on that person.
Yes, like you are a genetic experiment.
Yeah,
like you do not exist. You do not have feelings. You do not have ambitions. You exist to make my life easier.
Yeah. All right. We see Milchick get on a motorcycle. Also, as with all license plates, I think, or many license plates, because we've seen this phrase before. It says "remedium hominibus," I think. Which I believe means a cure for mankind. And there is no state on the license plate. The entire show Severance, I believe, takes place in the fictional town of Kier in a state called PE, full name unknown. So like that's yeah. There's no people think it was shot in like New York and other places, but they've never said this is in Ohio or this is New York. They don't say where it is. So it's in Kier, PE. That's where Severance takes place. All right. Let's talk about what happens with Mark. Milchick shows up at Rickon and Devin's house, and we learn some interesting things about how it all played out. First of all, Rickon and Devin and Mark discuss the Cobell Selvig situation, and Rickon says Co-Selvig would be useful nomenclature.
Perhaps Co-Belvig would be a helpful nomenclature?
And assuming that she's alive really was about the baby.
Which I thought was kind of interesting because it reminded me of how Reddit and other, fan theory places often make up names and portmanteaus for, it seemed like a nod to that. So I shall call her Co-Selvig from now on in honor of that, because we don't know if it's actually Co-Bell or Selvig or who she really is. Milchick shows up and explains to Mark what happened and explains what the overtime contingency is and apologizes for it. There is a great moment when Mark says, I was never told about the overtime contingency. And he says, OTC disclosure can be found in your office paperwork. And then he just moves on from that, which is a reference to how whenever you sign up, whenever you like buy an iPhone or whatever,
terms
you have
of service, please
you have to
agree.
click on this accept terms of service, which is like 5,000 pages long and who knows what it contains. Apparently Lumen uses the same techniques as Apple.
Very funny.
We learned that Innie Mark took over for a period of 39 minutes. Devin is afraid that Innie Mark's going to get punished, but Milchick says we have no punishments at Lumen, which is clearly a lie. Also, I like that Devin says, hey, wondering how common it is for your employees to commit lactation fraud. And at that point, Milchick explains that Ms. Co-Selvig is the problem. And now she is gone, and your Innie doesn't need to worry about that again. We are going to make improvements to Lumen. Don't you worry about it, Mark. And you can feel safe sending your Innie back in there. So he also appeals to Mark's mercy and says, I'd hate to reward your Innie with non-existence for his brave actions.
I'd hate to reward his courage with non-existence.
Which I thought was kind of pretty gross.
Yeah.
Pretty gross stuff.
Hate that. Ugh.
There's a lot. There's a lot of talk about what exactly Mark meant when he said she's alive. And I'll be honest, Patrick, it didn't even occur to me, certainly not when I first watched it, but like it had not occurred to me that people wouldn't understand what he meant because they just found the baby. And so maybe he's talking about the baby. And there's a lot of doubt about whether he's actually referring to the baby and who is exactly alive. Devin and Mark meet, and he explains, like, I identified her, his wife. I saw her body, end quote. So seems definitive that his wife is dead. And I understand why he would not believe his innie and want to find a more plausible explanation for that. So later on, Milchick visits Mark at home and says that there's going to be reforms, in investigation of your innie's claims, regular wellness checks from an independent org. All lies, I think. And he really puts on the hard press. He really wants Mark to come back. He says, the innie Mark I know is funny. He's found love. And Mark's like, with who? Let's move right on past that question. Let's not talk about who. And he says, he knows nothing of the pain I see in you right now. The solace you have given him down there will make its way to you. End quote. Which I thought was very beautiful, And yes, Milchick is lying through the teeth about a lot of things, but he's also not wrong about what he's saying. You know what I mean? Like, everything he's saying is true about Innie Mark and Innie Mark's life. He's just trying to use it for his own ends. Anyway, any other thoughts on the Mark subplot, Patrick Klepek?
Well, I wonder if the Mark subplot and the line we get from Milchick about, like, well, that stuff will feed back into you.
The solace you have given him down there will make its way to you.
Very easy to imagine that being part of, like, the broader cultural pitch of Severance. Like, very much like, have you, like, this is a form of, like, going to a therapist. This is a form of therapy to, like, work through your problems. Like, is to sever yourself from those problems so that your other self can live a more freed life, which will allow you to live a more, like, that's a very, a very Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, like, sort of pit. But, like, I can see that being really, imagine all sorts of, like, horrible tragedies that, like, befall people. Like, the idea that, like, there's a version of you that could be freed of all that, and if that comes with a pseudoscience therapy pitch, that, like, you'll heal
in some way. You're connected in some way, or, like, actions that person takes, like, will somehow impact you, right? Yeah,
I 100% can see that being a very compelling pitch that would get people to sign up. And so I wonder if that's going to be, like, other than, the episode obviously gets into, like, well, they're obviously also compensating these people reasonably well, like, to participate in this. Like, I do wonder if that is, like, part of the broader Severance pitch, other than, like, work-life balance, but also, like, is your life hard? Like, what if you could separate from it and then work backwards to a better version of yourself? That doesn't sound far off.
Yeah. We learn what happened with Dylan and Irving in the aftermath of season 1's finale.
Oh wait, can I back up just a second?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to shout out. I'm gonna get the line exactly wrong, but when they're discussing the passing of his wife, he says, like, you were choking on her ghost.
You were choking on her ghost.
That you felt like you were choking on her ghost.
Right. That hit me that is beautifully haunting writing. It's I think a really interesting way to describe what it feels like to go through, like, traumatic grief of, like, the loss of a loved one, and just wanted to shout that out. Like, that hit me, and I was like, oh man, that's just good writing to explain emotions. And
also weird to hear it coming from a coworker / superior.
Well, yeah. So I was one of those, like, I paused the episode, and, like, turned to my wife. I was like, oh man, if it wasn't coming from Milchick, I think I'd be sobbing right now. Because when I think about that line in the relation to my father, like, that makes me want to crawl into a ball. But thankfully Milchick said it, so it's, like, haunting and distant, so I don't have to, like, sit with it too badly. But I just that was just, like, I thought it was, like, really beautiful writing coming from a very distrustful person, but, like, nonetheless, I thought was a really wonderful turn of phrase.
Agreed. Let's talk about what happens with Dylan and Irving this episode. So Milchick fires them both. Unclear exactly why. He fired, like, I think
he's not given specific instructions, right? So Helly says, like,
right,
a version of, like, go with the grace of God, but
do what Kier, follow how Kier guides you, right?
Yes.
And so he fires him because I think he's like, hey, we got to clean this situation up. We learned this episode that Mark is really important to this Cold Harbor project, right? So they need to get Mark. They don't need the other people. So it's like, well, then just get rid of the other people, right?
Yeah.
You don't need them. Dylan tries to get a new job at a door factory. And this is what's amazing about Severance is like, I'm sure they spent a lot of money on this door factory scene because you see the doors going by in the background. That's they either built that for real or it's a visual effect, but whatever it is, it's expensive. And it's this incredible scene where you see the kind of the job discrimination that he goes through as a severed person. It's hilarious. It's funny. This is a show that's just like, hey, we're going to have a door factory interview for you. And I'm like, I love this show. I love this show, just the way that whole thing plays out. Incredible. But also the fact that Dylan is a severed, they call it that way. Like they even have like a discriminatory language already. Like you're a severed, like it's pretty interesting.
It's also one of the first real glimpses we get into what does the outside world like. We don't like, again, like this feels like is it a fictional town, fictional like we don't. There's so much about the world that we don't understand,
right.
and it's all filtered through Lumen. And like that newspaper is obviously like a bunch of BS, like, you're influencing severance reform, yada, yada, yada. This scene is like one of those instances where we get like a real honest reaction to this moment in the culture and this technology. And I mean, just the way that guy flips on a dime from like, oh, buddy, you're coming in. Like, I love you. Like, how could I not love you? You're going to come work here, to just, you are subhuman, you are disgusting, get out of my establishment.
We did see conversation like that Adam Scott's character had with other people about severed people in the first season, and there was the political activists that he bumped into on the street trying to stop severance. So we got glimpses of it, but you're right, this is kind of like in a more conventional, generic situation, like how this would play out in a normal everyday environment. As for Irving, he tries to make a call at a phone booth. That's how you really know this is a weird place and time, because there's a phone booth. But he does not seem to be successful. And then we see Bert G is watching him. And as of right now, we still don't know what happened in the aftermath of Irving and Bert meeting. Like I assume meeting each other at the end of last season. So I think that subplot is going to continue to move extremely slow, as it has since season 1. And I'm fine with that. No problem with that. All right. So back to Lumen. Helena says, we need Mark S. back at work long enough to complete Cold Harbor. There's this higher up dude at Lumen that's called, his name is Mr. Drummond. He's kind of a bigger dude. And he's in the background of a lot of these scenes. And he says the board is going to give him, Mark S., what he wants, including Heli R. He won't finish without them. So I haven't really explained this yet, but what we learn is that the events of last week that we were told took place 5 months later, it's actually been closer to 5 days later. Massive twist. Whoa, Lumen lied. And we learned that, hey, they're all going back in. It did seem suspicious that they could just round them all up so quickly last week after Mark S. wanted them back. But right, like we see the events of this episode are contemporaneous with some of the events of last episode, right? And it's like, oh wow, okay, so they're happening at the same time. The call that Mark S. makes over to the board, and everyone's listening to it. And we see Mark walking into the building, only to see the other Mark complaining, 3 days of work, I broke a lease in Grand Rapids. So like, if you measure the time, it's been a couple days since the end of season 1, and then 3 additional days of Mark going to work, and then the team is returned. So basically, it's been like probably 5 or 6 days, probably a week or so since the events of last episode, or events of last season. That is the total time frame. Patrick Klepek, how'd you feel when you first realized that was true?
Well, mostly I keep thinking about the board. That's definitely one of the outstanding questions I have about this show. But yes, I mean, I think it plays into everything that you were, we discussed, which is that Lumen is assume Lumen is lying. Even there's no cameras down here.
Right.
Okay, like what am I to believe that just
Right.
because like Helena's down here does not necessarily mean
Sure.
that they aren't completely. I assume they're monitoring everything, and so I like that. Obviously there are still many things to be discovered, but that by the end of this episode, it does feel like we have sort of a complete-ish picture of like the timeline, the
Right.
immediate consequences of season 1, and then where we go from here is like, I don't know. Like I've no idea where the season, obviously like if Helena's down there, that's obviously a bomb to go off at some point where like that reveal is inevitably going to happen. But it's nice. Like we actually have like a bunch of answers-ish, which like feels satisfying enough to fill in enough blanks that, like, all right, now what? And that's what we get to find out next week.
I think the show does a good job of explaining why people would go back to the severed floor, right? Like you see, it's a tough economy out there. It's tough economy for the tech sector. You can't just like get a job whenever you want these days. And so,
well, and the creators involved have talked about like this. These seasons, these 2 seasons of the show were in many ways creatively defined by the eras in which they were written, shot, produced, which is like different strikes in Hollywood, COVID, return to office politics, and so I changing economy. That is part of the show. Is not we don't see like Trump off in the distance or people wearing masks, but like those elements of our culture like are reflected in the show, and I think you can see that pretty acutely, especially in an episode like this.
Yeah. There is one long shot where we see all the severed people returning to work, and it kind of leads into them going back in the return scene that we saw in last episode. Like this scene leads into that. It's cool that they did it all in one long shot. I was just kind of like, hey, we're just gonna show off. We're just gonna do a thing in one long shot, and it's gonna look really cool, and it's gonna be a really creative way to show you like all these people going back into the elevator. I thought it was really well done. Mark goes home and then sees Koselvig at home and asks, "Hey, what's the deal? And do you know something about Gemma?" And Koselvig screams and then drives away, and that's how the episode ends. So that's what happened in Severance season 2, episode 2. Patrick Klepek, any other thoughts or stray observations you want to make about the episode?
I'm all in. I think what this is less an observation or critical analysis as much as I think you and I talked about. Well, if season 2 of Severance is a failure, it will be interesting to see how it struggled to tell another story in this world, which I don't think would have been shocking. And we have only seen 2 episodes. You and I are watching episode by episode. We are firmly resisting hitting further into the button to see any further than we're the audience is. But I'm excited. I'm excited that I'm excited about the show. It seems like we're in for like a really excellent, interesting season of television. It seems like they're very thoughtful about how do we expand and go deeper in this world. And it feels familiar and also completely different. And that's all I was asking for. It was like, I want this great show to keep being great. That's hard to do. We just, watch the struggles of a show like Squid Game to like, what does it mean to do another story in this universe? It's not easy, even if it seems like a natural extension. And so we'll see where it lands with its answers or its mysteries. But I'm just, like I said, excited to be excited about watching more Severance.
It does feel like we're in the hands of some master storytellers here, and that's always a great feeling. But just want to give a shout out to kind of the way they told this story again. And they didn't really hold your hand through it, in my opinion. Like, there's no one that sits down and explains, oh, so they were lying and it's only been 5 days. You kind of, as the audience, have to put it together. It's not hard. I'm just saying, but like, they trust the audience to kind of understand what's going on. And I really appreciate that. And just, it's a fun little rug pull of, hey, what happened last week wasn't like the whole premise of last week's episode is wrong. And it was a lie, and now we're going to show you what it actually was. And they had to air it in this order, because if they did it in reverse, last week's episode would not have the same impact. Right? You would not have this feeling of, oh my God, 5 months. Wow. Oh, like, I feel so disoriented. Like, you don't have all those feelings if you know it's all lies in the beginning. So props to them for doing it this way. Really appreciate the show. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.